Welcome back, everyone, to the Risk Intel podcast, powered by SRA Watchtower, where we share risk intelligence with experts from across the banking industry. I'm your host, Ed Vincent, CEO at SRA Watchtower. Back to the Risk Intel podcast. I'm extremely excited to have Joel Castaneda, the Chief Risk Officer at Vantage Bank, back on the show with us today. Joel, thanks very much for coming back on.
Yep, happy to be back. Thanks, Ed.
Joel, during our last conversation, we talked about the business transformation journey at Vantage, and Sean shared some of his vision, and you came in and shared your application of that into the risk area, and it was really around that North Star of data as the currency of the future. We talked a lot about that and talked about the unlocking the power of that data, and then the importance of one, access to the data, two, workflows around the data sets, number three, governance, and then number four, we talked about leveraging technology, including AI, to extract value from the data. It's great to get your hands on this data, but if you don't extract value from it, it's kind of an academic exercise. And so if we today, kind of using that as a foundation, I'd like to unpack this concept of using technology and AI to really scale and drive forward the risk program. And so you hinted in our last conversation about some of the ways that you've modernized the risk program there at Vantage and use that to create efficiencies in processes and workflows and so forth. So I'd love to start there if you would on how you decided to really lean into technology there within the risk program.
Yeah, I think the biggest driver, first of all, is resource constraints, right? So I'm committed to running an efficient risk program, utilizing our resources appropriately and efficiently. So that was really the main driver, because as a CRO, right, you want to add value and you want to minimize cost. So that was really the thought process behind, okay, we're growing quickly. How do we leverage tools, technology, including artificial intelligence, to drive efficiency? So that was the root behind it, and I guess it's been 4 to 5 months where we've been experimenting in the risk domain with AI. But yeah, it really came down to efficient use of resources and not just throwing bodies at work tasks, but leveraging technology to do so.
And that theme of adding value and minimizing costs, right? That should resonate with all of our listeners, right? Who are in the risk space, right? Those premises. Right, we all operate in a world of finite resources, and so coming to the table and saying, all right, how do we do more with the same or more with less, or how do we really get greater value? That message should certainly resonate. So, all right, you've now set the stage, right? You're ready to lean in, and you say, all right, there's this AI concept out there. How do you even get started, right? How do you think about getting into the AI space there in the risk world?
Yeah, so for those of you that tuned into the last podcast with our chief business architect, Sean Main, he's the one that kind of nudged me and was like, "Hey, you need to be looking at this." And that was really a mandate from our CEO across the organization to, okay, how do we incorporate AI across the organization and do it in a safe manner, right? So we'll talk about security aspects and policies and how we do that safely. But there's really internally a nudge from our team. And this happened right before budget season. And as you think about the risk program and, okay, what are our needs for next year? I started to experiment with AI and leveraging it for multiple use cases that we'll get into. And that really stemmed from, number one, top down, right? So our CEO comes from a technology background, so he's in the know. And
Yep.
then our business architect, like, okay, with that mandate, we need to find some use cases across the organization. How do we leverage it for risk? And then we started those conversations. Sean had already been using it for multiple use cases, and he kind of gave me that nudge, and I started experimenting.
All right, so you're now out of the starting gate. You've got, I'm going to say, air cover from above, right? You've got organizational buy-in.
Yep.
As you said, we'll come back to some of the pitfalls you need to be aware of, or parameters that you need to make sure you have in place. But let's jump right into a couple of use cases, because you found some use cases pretty quickly that delivered really some meaningful value on those two dimensions you mentioned of value and cost.
hmm Yeah. So the first use case that I came out the gate with was we wanted to overhaul some of our audit processes. And so I worked with our internal audit manager and said, okay, we need to, everything that you're doing from an audit standpoint, you have your processes here, process there, everything's kind of scattered, right? You don't have a uniform audit playbook. I think that's important.
Mm-hmm.
So we took to put our heads together and said, okay, we're going to create this. How do we do it efficiently? And that was our first use case to create essentially an audit process procedure playbook manual, leveraging all the things that we did across the organization from an audit perspective, leveraging AI. So that isn't like you go to Chat GPT and you give me an audit playbook. No, you're not going to get that, right? So
Right.
and we can get into the mechanisms, but you got to break it down into smaller chunks of, it can only generate so much information at a time. You're not going to get a 90-page manual from one prompt, right?
Yep.
So we took some existing documents that we had. We started to leverage that and okay, enter some of that into the AI chatbot and okay, generate some additional content. What are we missing? And I will tell you, like the knowledge base, at least leveraging the model of GPT 4.0 in audit, in compliance, in regulatory matters is significant, right? And I'll tell you, approaching it with knowledge already, I think is important because you want to make sure that and fact
Right.
check. You're not going to get a list of sources for the most part, but it's kind of that general body of knowledge that the model has collected over time that'll spit back. So IIA standards, it knows them, right? So we started prompting for that. Okay, so here's the standards of what an audit program should be. Here's prompting for Federal Reserve guidance. How do we align those things? And then started to break it down into smaller chunks, leveraging little prompts to generate what we needed. The thing that I started with was okay, based on these standards, uh, build me a table of contents for what this procedural playbook manual should look like. And then so that was the first prompt, right? So uh,
Yep.
leveraging all that knowledge, leveraging some internal processes. Then I have a table of contents. Let's just say 12 indexes. Okay,
Yep.
11 of those look accurate. Let's kick one out and okay, let's start to build. Okay, number one, what are the subcomponents that we need to consider here? So that's the next prompt, right? So chapter one, subcomponents. Then let's detail each of those subcomponents given the context of our bank, right? So a little bit of context on our size, how we operate,
Mm-hmm.
and then all of a sudden we have one chapter. Let's say 2 to 3 pages of content. Let's move on to the next one. So that's what I mean, like little bite-sized chunks. And obviously we're fact checking along the way, editing and tailoring as we need it. But what we found is if you put in the standards that you need, right? So regulatory guidance plus IAA standards, and I mean it's going to generate pretty accurate content. Again, you gotta come in with a body of knowledge to fact check it, but that's where you get really efficient, right? So maybe a year ago we would have engaged a firm and say come in, look at everything,
Right.
efficiency, cost savings, right? Just right there. So that was our first use case.
That start to end, rough time period. How long did that take you duration wise?
Um, so 3 business days, not all consumed. We had a really good product. So I mean, a matter of hours, really.
I mean, that's incredible, right? You talk about cost and time as those two dimensions. Um, there's no way even if you had an unlimited budget, you wouldn't
Right.
have gotten something like that back in 3 days, right? And
Absolutely.
then set aside the fact that none of us have an unlimited budget,
Right.
right? And you can now save those, right? Save those investment dollars to put towards something else where you can truly add value.
Right.
That's an incredible example, and I appreciate the concepts along the way there of breaking it down into smaller chunks, right? Little prompts.
Mhm.
Then fact checking along the way, bringing your right the expertise, the experience that
Right.
that folks have, and then providing the context of making this relevant to our financial institution, right? So there's a few different themes there. How about another use case?
Yeah. So after that, then started working on, okay, we need to modify and tailor some policies, right? So took at least one existing policy and said, okay, there's some components missing here. Uh, Asking the AI to, based on industry knowledge, experience in this domain, help check my policy against what should be there, right? So then we get some outliers, and okay, did you think about this? Did you think about this? And that's all tied to laws and regs that it prompted us for. And what I would find is, okay, it didn't really catch everything I needed, but if I ask it in a certain way or in another way, then it'll bring in some additional information, and then I can leverage that. So gap analysis for a policy that took again a few hours, and then we had a board ready policy revision to get to our board in the late fall. So again, starting with these two bodies of work that were general, nothing proprietary. So I'm kind of risk averse, right? So I'm thinking, okay, how do we do this without revealing any, customer data, any bank data, anything that's proprietary to Vantage, and kind of two safe use cases out the gate. So, yeah, that was the second, and then things just started to snowball from there.
Uh, all right, I mean, it's spectacular again, right? Hours rather than days or weeks, and I think that your last point there around not expo doing it in a safe way, right? Is particularly hopefully reassuring to people
Yeah.
that you can get value out of this and still be very responsible and thoughtful and risk averse, frankly, while you're getting going. And as you get more and more comfortable, you can extend. Um,
Yeah, and I will tell you, my first call is to our CISO, right? So, like,
yeah.
here's the premise. Here's what I would like to do. How do we do this safely, right? And so then he walks me through the guardrails, and he had already been on the journey of how do we put this behind our, firewalls, and to where there, number one, there's visibility into input and output from his chair, and then number two, there's data protections behind our instance of Azure. So those two things, he was comfortable, and we've been using AI in multiple applications in his world, right, for our security and incident management product, for some email phishing identification. So he had already set up the infrastructure to do this in a safe manner.
Well, there is one other use case that I want to come back to, but let's flesh out this topic first, and maybe we'll close with that other use case. Um, your first call went to your CISO.
Hmm.
Talk a bit more about the resources, the tools, the controls, the security, right? What were you said there was a bunch of stuff that was already in place,
Right.
that allowed you to get going. So shed a little bit of light on that if you would.
Yeah. So since we had an organizational mandate to begin to experiment with AI, we had made sure that in our information security policy that there was the right policy language in there on our use and safe use of that. Then our CISO turned that policy into actual controls in his cyber world, right? All the things that he tinkers with from a data protection standpoint.
Yeah.
And then we had a certified list of acceptable use for AI within the organization. you can use these things, right? These AI models within these programs, and that was limited across the organization. So that plus board approval and discussion at the board, that kind of set the tone, and that had already happened. I was a little late to the party to get into the utilization, but the organization had already been in that mechanism.
When you then you said that there were a list of acceptable use models and tools and so forth. How did you go about deciding where to start at that point?
Yeah, so we started with the tools that our CISO had implemented that went through our vendor management program, right? So that was really in the cyber domain, looking for phishing emails, threats from the cyber perspective. Some of those AI tools had been leveraged, and that's how he set up the infrastructure. Okay, here's this application; it's got an AI, use case in it. Here's how we're going to protect it and seal it off from uh, number one, from like anything that shouldn't be in there. We know it's not in there, right? From our instance of Azure and understanding how the data is flowing there. Um, yeah, so it really came from the cyber world and the tools that were already implemented.
All right. And the what has kept you right? So there was a policy, there was a an approach, right? The organization had gotten comfortable with, right? Board approval, right? Set of tools that right you had to start with. Um, what given I'm going to ask you to put your risk officer hat back
Yeah.
on here for a second. Um, what though caused, was there anything that caused you angst or concern before you leapt in to this arena?
It's just the models being a black box, and not truly understanding how models are leveraging your data input, right? There's a there's a monetization aspect to these models, right? They're low cost to the end user, but they're generating something out of it, right?
Right.
Irrespective of who it's coming from. So that unknown was my hesitancy to dive in, and obviously we still have protections in place. I'm not going to go drop in a customer file with customer data in there. I'm just not going to do that. I don't care how you know what firewalls are in place, or someone tells me that the data is safe. We're going to be cautious there, just not completely understanding the realm.
Right. Are there any mistakes that or lessons learned that you have from the last couple of months that are worth sharing, that people should be mindful of, or that you would say, all right, I would do it a little bit differently either next time or going forward?
I'm not sure mistake. We've been really cautious, so I wouldn't say that there's been any mistakes. But I think if you, like, going back to what I said in the beginning, I thought, like, okay, if I prompt something, I can get this great, whatever I asked for. That's really not the case, right? You got
Right.
to understand what you're prompting, and you got to take it in bite-sized chunks to really get value out of it. I would say if you're timid in approaching it, and you have high expectations, kind of lower them a little bit. It's gonna be great from an efficiency standpoint, but you gotta pace yourself in how you approach it, and understand the limitations at this point with the current models.
I'm going to ask you, and maybe in our blog that accompanies the podcast here, to give us a
Yep.
couple of those prompt examples to give
Yep.
folks an idea as to how do you get going here. I think it would be great
Sure.
for folks to be encouraged, and maybe right it demystifies it a little bit if you give someone right an idea of, okay, here's where you start, and
Yep.
if nothing else, right, you start kind of just again, providing a little bit more comfort that
Yep.
this is how you get going.
Yep. Absolutely.
uh, I'd love to come back to one other use case that we had talked about,
Mhm.
selfishly, because this one hit close to
Yep.
home when you were going through a process of looking some of the elements of your risk program and your risk, the descriptions of your risk indicators. And so
Mhm.
I'd love it if you would share that
Yep.
example, because that was one where frankly it caused us to look in the mirror and say, right, we need to be doing more
Right.
within Watchtower to help our risk officers take this journey.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say the combination of leveraging these large language models and the implementation of Watchtower, it's a beautiful synergy right now because there, the instance of Watchtower, there's a lot of open-ended things that are intentionally left open-ended for the CRO or whoever is setting it up to customize it to the bank's risk profile and needs. Right. So as I'm approaching it again, resource constraints and number one, that is it, right? Number two, like I want to get my hands dirty. If it's a system implementation, it's a risk system implementation, I'm going to be in there, right? So
Right,
I'm the
right.
one going in and setting up our instance of Watchtower and marrying it against the way we view enterprise risk management. Um, and okay, so there are risk metrics, and there's a blank for a risk description, right? So the metrics there, and okay, let's here's the metric, and I prompted AI to give me a risk description of what that metric means. So my first prompt was, okay, just tell me what this means, right? Give me a risk description for this, and it was okay. It was really when I started to set up the system instructions in GPT 4.0, which is really you set that up for how you want the model to respond. So I let's I took okay the general risk description. It was okay. I wasn't too happy with it, but here's how I think a risk description should be written. Here are the
Mm-hmm.
components. So I prompted AI. It's like here's my idea on the elements of a risk description. What am I missing? And it said, did you think about this and this? And like, actually, that's a good idea. That would be good elements of a good risk description for a risk metric or a KRI.
Yes.
Now I took, okay, so when I ask for a risk description, I put in the system instructions, give me these 5 things back, right? I want to know these things and I want them to read in paragraph form a risk description for this KRI when I ask you for that. So now I have consistency in output, right? So it's taking its
Yes.
body of knowledge with my instructions and some, things that I hadn't thought about that it has said, hey, think about these things. And I, flip that into the system instructions. Now it's giving me exactly what I asked for in a very consistent way that needed very little intervention to edit. So surprisingly, the model knows a lot about banking. Again, it's a very wide swath of information that the model was trained on. So call report metrics would give you pretty good risk descriptions of what those mean, right? And I'll give you a specific example. Um, I gave it the 5 elements of risk, and I can't remember right off the top of my head, but I told it at the end of the risk description for that KRI, I want you to tell me if the ratio is higher, what that means from a risk perspective, and if the ratio is lower, from what that means from a risk perspective. So when my board is picking up that KRI report, they know, they don't just see the scale and where it's plotted, but the higher means this and the lower means this, right? This is good, this is bad. So in that risk description, it's giving me exactly what I asked for, the elements of it, and then that little end piece, which a higher ratio means X, lower ratio means Y. And then I can, give it 15 metrics and give me the risk description. It's going to be consistent. Obviously, I'm going to review everything, but I'll have consistent risk metrics, right? So I call the system instructions. I saved it as my risk analyst. So again, going back to efficiency, this would have taken a lot of time and a lot of cost to get things set up the way that I want them to be set up in my instance of Watchtower, and it would have taken a body full time. Now I'm using part of my time to get the system set up the way I want it in a very efficient manner.
I mean, it's mind blowing, right? On one level, but it's also so intuitive and so simple. And maybe that's the elegance of this is that it is you know basic concepts there of consistent, defining instructions, achieving
Right.
consistency, right? It's going to be more consumable by your audience, and you also now are able to get your hands on a wider set, whereas that wouldn't have scaled previously. And so to your earlier point, right, about wanting to really understand what's in there, you now have been able to achieve that along this journey as well. So I mean, just so many really fascinating dimensions there that hopefully encourage folks to say that you've got to give this a try. You've got to dip your toe in the water.
Yeah, I would say it's a game changer as far as efficiency and consistency, right? Another thing we had written our top risk statements that we present to the board, and I wanted to think through, okay, am I missing anything in these considerations? How can I write them better? AI helped me do that, right? So, again, system instructions, here's how I want it to read. The risk that caused by may result in, right? And then, here's a little executive summary of the risk. Here's a detailed description of the risk. Here's what it means from an impact to the balance sheet, to, what stakeholder it impacted. So just consistency in application, and things that would have taken me a long time, or taken a paid analyst a long time to do. It's just really expedited.
Have you received any reaction from folks across the organization yet? Have they interacted with this or experienced it, or felt any of the downstream impact?
Yeah, I'll tell you another use case really quick is we started leveraging for non-board meetings. Some of our committees, we were experimenting with AI minutes. So instead of having a dedicated analyst to running the meeting and taking minutes, AI minutes have been another game changer. So the biggest wow was, we just ended one of our committee meetings, and 2 minutes later I'm sending out professional minutes in a Word document that I maybe made 3 edits to, because the AI just absolutely nailed it. So that was like, wait a minute, those things usually take a month to turn around. Like, you just sent them right after the meeting. What's going on? So anytime I get to showcase that across the organization, or the use of AI across the organization, again, we're doing it in a very safe manner, behind all our data protection. I do, because it's getting people thinking, okay, well, how can I incorporate this in my department? How can I become more efficient, right? So.
Right. If someone receives those minutes, right, 24 or 48 hours or a couple of hours after the meeting, right, their antenna are going to go up and say, wow, right, I've got to be part of this. I've got to get on the bus.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, Joel, thank you very much for sharing all this. I mean, it's invigorating and motivating, right? When you hear about this, and hopefully the other part of the other takeaway people have is this demystifies things a little bit, and to say, look, there are some, fairly safe and relatively easy to action ways to utilize AI. Certainly a lot more that can be done with it down the line. But hopefully this is the trigger for folks to say, I'm going to give it a shot, right? Whether it's the meeting minutes, whether it's the description of the risk indicators, the use cases, I think are abundant. And I appreciate you sharing some specifics there today.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a CRO, and talking to other CROs who I'm sure will be tuning into this, I would say talk to your CISO first, right? Get buy-in, and then start to experiment slowly. I mean, it's a game changer as far as how much ground you can cover. We're expected to do a lot, to see a lot, to have insight across the organization. So time is precious for us, and it's been an absolute time saver for me.
I love it, and I think that those two parting comments there of talk to your CISO, and then experiment. And I think that's the other theme that probably should have been highlighted here. And I'm glad you picked up on that it's not one and done, right? It is iterative, and just because this works, maybe the next thing's not going to, but if that doesn't, the next thing might. So just keep at it.
Yep.
Excellent.
Got it.
Good stuff. Thank you, Joe. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Ed. Appreciate it.
Take care.